Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, stands bleeding in Terminal C as 3 bullet wounds stain his tailored suit. Airport security officers lower their weapons, realizing their catastrophic mistake. But what Marcus does next will transform this moment of injustice into something nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible story of injustice and unexpected triumph, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking true stories that will leave you speechless. This tale of one man's response to unthinkable discrimination will challenge everything you think you know about justice and forgiveness. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Marcus Thompson had always believed that success would shield him from the prejudices that plagued his childhood. At 42 years old, this self-made billionaire stood as living proof that the American dream could still be achieved, even by a kid from Detroit's roughest neighborhoods. As CEO of Thompson Industries, a tech conglomerate worth over $2 billion, Marcus commanded respect in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. This particular Tuesday morning found Marcus preparing for what could be the most important business meeting of his career. The merger with TechVision Corporation wasn't just about the $800 million deal. It was about creating the largest minority-owned technology company in American history. His assistant Sarah had confirmed every detail twice. First class, flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles, private car service waiting at LAX, and a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Marcus's journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Growing up in Detroit's East Side, he'd watched his mother Gloria work 3 jobs just to keep food on their table. She cleaned office buildings at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and took in laundry on weekends. Despite their struggles, Gloria never let Marcus forget the power of education. "Your brain is your ticket out of here," she'd tell him while helping with homework at their tiny kitchen table. That ticket came in the form of a full scholarship to MIT, where Marcus studied computer engineering. While his classmates partied, Marcus worked in the campus library, sending every spare dollar home to his mother. After graduation, he started Thompson Industries in a cramped garage, writing code for small businesses and slowly building his client base. The irony wasn't lost on him that despite his success, he still faced suspicious looks in upscale restaurants, still had to dress impeccably to be taken seriously, still had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect his white counterparts received automatically. But Marcus had learned to navigate these challenges with grace and determination. Standing in his Atlanta penthouse that morning, adjusting his custom Italian suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come. The $5,000 suit was more than just clothing. It was armor against a world that too often judged him by his skin color rather than his achievements. In his briefcase lay the merger documents that would cement his legacy, along with his company laptop containing years of proprietary technology and business strategies. Marcus had built Thompson Industries on the principle of giving back. His company employed over 15,000 people, with a particular focus on hiring from underrepresented communities. The Marcus Thompson Foundation had provided college scholarships to over 3,000 students from low-income families. He donated millions to inner-city schools, homeless shelters, and community development programs. Yet despite all his philanthropy and success, Marcus still remembered the sting of discrimination. The venture capitalists who'd questioned his qualifications, the board meetings where he had to prove his expertise repeatedly, the subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that in many spaces, he would always be seen as an outsider first and a businessman second. As his driver navigated through Atlanta traffic toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Marcus reviewed his presentation one final time. This merger would create over 5,000 new jobs and establish scholarship programs in 12 major cities. More importantly, it would prove that Black-owned businesses could compete at the highest levels of American commerce. The limousine pulled up to the departure terminal, and Marcus gathered his belongings: his platinum briefcase, his company laptop, and the portfolio containing contracts that would change his life forever. He tipped the driver generously, as was his custom, and walked toward the terminal entrance with the confidence of a man who had earned his place in the world through talent, hard work, and unwavering determination. Little did Marcus know that within the next hour, all of his success, all of his achievements, all of his careful reputation building would be stripped away by 3 bullets and the assumption that a successful black man must somehow be a threat. The sliding glass doors of Terminal C opened with their familiar whoosh, and Marcus stepped into the bustling atmosphere of one of America's busiest airports. The familiar sounds of rolling luggage, boarding announcements, and hurried conversations created a symphony of travel that he'd grown accustomed to over years of business trips. Today felt different, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. At the first-class check-in counter, the young airline representative, Jessica, smiled brightly as she processed his ticket. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Flying to Los Angeles today for business?" Her professional demeanor was exactly what Marcus expected, and the transaction proceeded smoothly. She handed him his boarding pass and wished him a pleasant flight, completely unaware that she might be one of the last people to treat him with normal courtesy that day. The walk toward security felt routine until Marcus began noticing the glances, not the occasional recognition he sometimes received from business magazine readers, but something different, something uncomfortable. A middle-aged white woman clutched her purse tighter as he passed. 2 men in business suits stopped their conversation to watch him walk by, their eyes following his movement with suspicious attention. Marcus had learned, long ago, to recognize these moments. Sometimes it was unconscious bias, people responding to deeply ingrained stereotypes without even realizing it. Other times it was more deliberate, more hostile. Today felt like the latter, though he couldn't understand why. His appearance was impeccable, freshly pressed suit, polished leather shoes, expensive briefcase, and the confident bearing of a successful executive. The security checkpoint loomed ahead, and Marcus joined the first-class lane, knowing the process would be quicker. That's when he first encountered Jerome Williams, a 20-year TSA veteran whose weathered face and stern expression suggested he took his job very seriously. Williams was processing passengers with mechanical efficiency until his eyes landed on Marcus. "Random additional screening," Williams announced loudly, his voice carrying across the security area. Several other passengers turned to look, their curiosity piqued by the unusual declaration. Marcus had flown first class hundreds of times and had rarely been selected for additional screening, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, no problem," Marcus replied politely, stepping to the side as Williams directed. He watched as 3 other first-class passengers, all white, passed through without any additional scrutiny. The randomness of his selection seemed suspiciously non-random. The pat-down was more thorough than anything Marcus had experienced before. Williams's hands lingered longer than necessary, his movements deliberate and invasive. "These clothes look expensive," Williams commented, his tone suggesting disbelief rather than admiration. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a CEO," Marcus answered simply, maintaining his dignity despite the growing humiliation. "Thompson Industries." Williams paused, his expression skeptical. "Never heard of it. You got any proof of that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus reached for his wallet, producing several business cards and his company identification badge. Williams examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. Meanwhile, Marcus's carry-on luggage received the full treatment. Every item was removed, examined, and questioned. His laptop, worth over $3,000, was handled roughly despite his requests for care. The merger documents were spread across the inspection table, their confidential contents visible to anyone passing by. "This is a lot of paperwork for a CEO," Williams observed, his tone implying that Marcus couldn't possibly be who he claimed to be. "What kind of business deals are you really involved in?" The questions became more pointed, more invasive. How could Marcus afford such expensive belongings? Where did he get the money for first-class tickets? Why was he traveling to Los Angeles? Each question carried an undertone of suspicion that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with the color of Marcus's skin. Other passengers began gathering, some recording the interaction with their phones. Marcus could hear whispered conversations speculating about what he might have done wrong. The assumption seemed to be that if TSA was treating him this way, He must have done something to deserve it. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus watched as dozens of other passengers moved through security without incident, while he remained trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare. His flight was scheduled to depart in 45 minutes, and he still hadn't cleared security. "Is there a supervisor I could speak with?" Marcus asked politely, his patience wearing thin despite his best efforts to remain calm. "I really need to catch my flight." Williams's expression hardened. "Are you trying to tell me how to do my job?" The question was loaded with hostility, and Marcus realized that any attempt to assert his rights would only escalate the situation. That's when Supervisor Karen Mitchell arrived, her approach suggesting she'd been briefed on the situation. Instead of de-escalating, Mitchell seemed determined to justify Williams's actions. "We take security very seriously here," she announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, especially when someone's story doesn't add up. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. Despite carrying proper identification, despite being polite and cooperative, despite having done absolutely nothing wrong, he found himself trapped in a web of suspicion and racial profiling that seemed to have no exit. The worst part was the growing audience of fellow travelers, all watching his humiliation unfold in real time. What Marcus didn't know was that an anonymous tip had just been called in, identifying him as a dangerous fugitive. The situation was about to escalate far beyond airport security theater into something that would forever change his life. The atmosphere in the security checkpoint shifted dramatically when Captain Robert Hayes arrived with 3 armed officers trailing behind him. Johnson, Rodriguez, and Blake moved with the purposeful stride of law enforcement officers responding to a serious threat. Their presence immediately transformed what had been an uncomfortable screening into something far more sinister. "We received a call," Hayes announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Without question, anonymous tip says you match the description of a fugitive we've been looking for. Dangerous individual involved in recent airport thefts." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The accusation was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that for a moment he couldn't even formulate a response. "There must be some mistake," he managed, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "I'm Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries. I can provide any documentation you need." Hayes examined Marcus's identification with theatrical skepticism, holding each document as if it might burst into flames. "These could be forged," he declared, loud enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear. "We've seen sophisticated fake IDs before." The officers positioned themselves strategically around Marcus, their body language aggressive and intimidating. Johnson, a stocky man with cold blue eyes, seemed particularly eager to escalate the confrontation. Rodriguez maintained a professional demeanor, but kept his hand near his weapon. Blake, the youngest of the 3, appeared nervous but determined to follow his colleague's lead. "I'm going to need your phone," Hayes demanded, extending his hand expectantly. "Can't have you coordinating with any accomplices." Marcus's phone contained contacts for senators, governors, Fortune 500 CEOs, and some of the most powerful attorneys in the country. One call to his legal team would resolve this nightmare within minutes. But as Hayes confiscated the device, that lifeline disappeared. "This is all highly irregular," Marcus protested, maintaining his composure despite the mounting pressure. "I have a constitutional right to legal representation." "You have the right to cooperate with our investigation," Hayes shot back, his tone suggesting that resistance would not be tolerated. "Unless you're hiding something. What do you think about racial profiling in airports? Comment number 1 if you believe this treatment was completely unjustified, or number 2 if you think security officers were just doing their job. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking stories of injustice. But wait until you hear what happens next, because this situation is about to take a turn that nobody could have predicted. The officers escorted Marcus to a private screening room, away from the public eye and the phone cameras that had been documenting his humiliation. The small, windowless space felt more like an interrogation chamber than a security checkpoint. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty of something. Body cameras are malfunctioning today, Johnson announced with suspicious timing. Technical difficulties. Hayes began a detailed interrogation that had nothing to do with airport security and everything to do with Marcus's success. How had he built his company so quickly? Where did his initial investment capital come from? Were his business dealings legitimate? Each question carried the implication that a black man couldn't possibly achieve such success through legal means. The merger documents spread across the inspection table became evidence in their manufactured case. "This looks like money laundering to me," Hayes suggested, pointing to the complex financial arrangements detailed in the contracts. Moving large sums of money between accounts, shell corporations, offshore holdings. Marcus tried to explain that these were standard merger and acquisition documents, the kind reviewed by teams of lawyers and approved by federal regulators. But his explanations fell on deaf ears. The officers had already decided he was guilty of something. They just needed to figure out what. "Your calm demeanor is suspicious," Blake observed, his inexperience showing in the obviousness of his bias. Innocent people usually get more upset when they're accused of crimes. The circular logic was maddening. If Marcus became emotional, they'd claim his anger proved his guilt. If he remained calm, his composure became evidence of criminal sophistication. There was no right response to their manufactured accusations. 45 minutes passed in that suffocating room. Marcus's flight had already departed, taking with it the most important business opportunity of his career. The merger meeting would proceed without him, and TechVision's board would wonder why Thompson Industries' CEO had simply failed to show up. "We know what you're really involved in," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than his louder colleagues. "The question is whether you're going to cooperate or make this difficult for everyone." Marcus realized with growing horror that rational discourse had become impossible. These men had constructed a narrative in which he was guilty, and no amount of evidence or explanation would change their minds. The color of his skin had transformed him from a successful businessman into a presumed criminal, and the presumption of innocence that formed the foundation of American justice had evaporated in the face of their collective bias. The walls seemed to be closing in, and Marcus understood that he was trapped in a situation that could only end badly. But he had no idea just how badly, or that within minutes, 3 bullets would transform this nightmare of discrimination into something far worse. The tension in the small screening room had reached a breaking point. 4 armed officers surrounded Marcus in the cramped space, their hostility palpable in the stale air. What happened next would later be dissected by investigators, analyzed by legal experts, and debated in courtrooms. But in that moment, time seemed to slow as a routine interaction spiraled into deadly violence. Marcus reached slowly toward his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and careful. "I have additional identification in my wallet," he said clearly, his voice steady despite the obvious danger of the situation. "Business licenses, credit cards, anything you need to verify my identity." "He's reaching for something," Johnson shouted, his voice cracking with panic and adrenaline. The stocky officer's hand flew to his weapon, his training apparently focused more on escalation than de-escalation. "Wait, I'm just getting my wallet," Marcus said, raising his hands slowly, palms visible, every movement calculated to appear non-threatening. But the damage was already done. Johnson's panic had infected the other officers like a contagious disease. "Gun! He's got a gun!" Blake screamed, though no weapon was visible. The young officer's inexperience showed in his inability to assess the actual threat level, his fear overriding his judgment. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, his hands now fully raised above his head, fingers spread to show he held nothing. "I don't have a weapon. I'm a businessman. Please don't shoot." His voice carried the desperation of a man who realized that his life hung in the balance of other people's assumptions and biases. Hayes barked an order that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Get on the ground. Now!" For Marcus, the command presented an impossible choice. His expensive suit, his dignity, his very identity as a successful professional, all warred against the idea of lying on the dirty floor like a common criminal. The hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in the heightened atmosphere of the screening room, those seconds were interpreted as defiance. "He's not complying," Rodriguez shouted, his weapon now drawn and pointed at Marcus's chest. "Suspect is resisting arrest." The first shot came from Johnson's service pistol, the bullet tearing through Marcus's shoulder and spinning him toward the wall. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and the smell of gunpowder immediately filled the air. Marcus's expensive suit jacket darkened with blood as he struggled to remain standing. "Stop! Please stop!" Marcus pleaded, his voice weakened by pain and shock. But the officers seemed caught in a deadly momentum that had taken on a life of its own. Blake fired. Second, his bullet finding Marcus's left arm and sending him stumbling sideways. The impact sent papers from his briefcase scattering across the floor, business cards and merger documents now mixed with drops of blood. Rodriguez's shot came last, the bullet entering Marcus's side and finally dropping him to his knees. The successful CEO who had walked into the airport an hour earlier as one of America's most accomplished entrepreneurs now knelt bleeding on a security room floor, 3 bullets in his body, his life forever changed by a perfect storm of fear, bias, and institutional racism. The silence that followed the gunshots was deafening. Smoke hung in the air, and the metallic smell of blood began to mix with the lingering gunpowder. Marcus remained conscious, his breathing labored but steady, his mind sharp despite the physical trauma. He could feel his expensive shirt sticking to his skin where blood had soaked through the fabric. The officers stood frozen, their weapons still drawn, the reality of what they had done beginning to penetrate their adrenaline-fueled panic. They had shot an unarmed businessman whose only crime was being black in an airport security checkpoint. "Medical! We need medical!" Hayes shouted into his radio, his voice now carrying a note of panic that hadn't been there when he was interrogating Marcus. The captain understood immediately that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Johnson holstered his weapon with shaking hands, his face pale as he stared at the man he had shot. I thought he had a gun," he stammered, the weakness of his justification obvious even to himself. Marcus, despite his pain, despite the injustice of his situation, despite the blood staining his $5,000 suit, managed to maintain his dignity. "I told you I was reaching for my wallet," he said quietly, his voice carrying no anger, only profound sadness at what America had become. Blake was openly shaking now, the reality of shooting an unarmed man finally penetrating his training and his assumptions. "The call said he was dangerous," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself that their actions had been justified. But there had been no call. The anonymous tip that had started this nightmare was about to be revealed as complete fabrication. A lie that had nearly cost Marcus his life and had certainly destroyed the careers of 4 security officers who had allowed their biases to override their judgment. As sirens began to wail in the distance and the airport's medical team rushed toward Terminal C, Marcus Thompson lay bleeding on the floor, his life forever divided into before and after this moment. But what he would do in response to this ultimate injustice would shock everyone who thought they knew how this story would end. The airport's medical team burst through the screening room door to find a scene that defied their expectations. Instead of a dangerous criminal subdued by justified force, they discovered a well-dressed businessman bleeding from 3 gunshot wounds, his expensive briefcase spilled across the floor, merger documents scattered and stained with blood. Dr. Angela Foster, the airport's head medical officer, immediately took charge of the situation. A 20-year veteran of emergency medicine, she had seen enough trauma to recognize when something didn't add up. "What happened here?" she demanded, while simultaneously assessing Marcus's wounds. Hayes attempted to control the narrative from the beginning. "Suspect was non-compliant, appeared to be reaching for a weapon," he recited, his words sounding rehearsed despite the chaos of the moment. Dr. Foster knelt beside Marcus, her practiced, hands checking his pulse and breathing while applying pressure to the bleeding wounds. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" she asked gently. "Marcus Thompson," he replied weakly but clearly. "CEO of Thompson Industries. I was trying to catch a flight to Los Angeles." His voice carried pain but also a dignity that immediately impressed the medical professional treating him. While paramedics worked to stabilize Marcus, Dr. Foster's suspicions grew. The victim's demeanor, his expensive clothing, his articulate responses, none of it matched the profile of a dangerous airport criminal. She had treated actual threats before, and this man displayed none of the characteristics she had learned to recognize. Airport Director Michael Stevens arrived within minutes, his face grave as he surveyed the scene. Stevens had spent 15 years managing one of America's busiest airports, and he understood immediately that this incident could destroy careers and cost the airport millions in lawsuits and lost reputation. "Get me a full identification workup on this individual," Stevens ordered his assistant. "I want to know everything about him within the next 10 minutes. The computer search that followed revealed the magnitude of the officer's error. Marcus Thompson, CEO and founder of Thompson Industries, estimated net worth $2.3 billion, philanthropist, recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to technology and education. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Stevens felt his stomach drop as he read the results. They had shot one of America's most successful entrepreneurs, a man whose charitable foundation had contributed over $50 million to various causes, whose company employed thousands of people across 12 states. Meanwhile, the officers' stories began to change. Johnson now claimed he had seen Marcus make a threatening gesture. Blake insisted the victim had charged toward them aggressively. Rodriguez maintained that Marcus had refused multiple commands to surrender. But the security footage from cameras outside the screening room told a different story. The hallway cameras had captured Marcus's calm demeanor, his polite interactions with other passengers, his cooperation throughout the extended screening process. There had been nothing threatening about his behavior at any point. Dr. Foster worked quickly to stabilize Marcus for transport to the hospital. "You're going to be okay," she assured him as paramedics prepared the gurney. "The wounds are serious but not life-threatening. You're lucky." Marcus managed a weak smile despite his pain. "Lucky isn't the word I'd use," he replied, but his tone held no bitterness toward the medical team trying to save his life. As news of the shooting began to spread through the airport, passengers started gathering, many recording videos with their phones. The initial assumption that security had stopped a dangerous criminal quickly gave way to confusion as details emerged about Marcus's identity and background. Sarah Chen, Marcus's assistant, arrived at the hospital within the hour after being contacted by airport officials. Her shocked expression reflected the disbelief of everyone who knew Marcus personally. "This is impossible," she kept repeating. "He's the gentlest man I know. He wouldn't hurt a fly." The anonymous tip that had triggered the entire incident was quickly traced back to Officer Johnson's personal cell phone. There had been no outside caller, no legitimate intelligence about a dangerous fugitive. The tip had been fabricated to justify what was clearly racial profiling taken to its deadly extreme. Local NAACP chapter president Reverend William Jackson arrived at the hospital demanding answers. "This is exactly the kind of institutional racism that we've been fighting for decades," he declared to the gathering crowd of reporters. "A successful black man can't even travel in first class without being shot by security." But Marcus, despite his pain and the injustice he had suffered, surprised everyone with his measured response. When reporters asked for a statement from his hospital bed, he declined to express anger or call for revenge. Instead, he simply said, "This incident reveals problems that run much deeper than one airport or 4 officers. The question now is, what we're going to do about it." What Marcus was planning to do about it would soon shock everyone who thought they understood how victims of such injustice typically respond. His next moves would transform this tragedy into something no one could have predicted. Despite the morphine coursing through his system and the bandages covering his wounds, Marcus Thompson's mind remained razor-sharp. From his hospital bed in Grady Memorial's VIP wing, he began orchestrating a response that would demonstrate the true extent of his power and influence in ways that would astonish everyone who thought they understood him. His first phone call went to Jennifer Martinez, the most feared civil rights attorney in America. Martinez had never lost a federal discrimination case and commanded fees that most people couldn't afford in a lifetime. "Jennifer, it's Marcus Thompson. I need you in Atlanta tonight." "My God, Marcus, I saw the news. Are you all right?" Martinez's voice carried genuine concern mixed with professional interest. She knew that cases like this could reshape civil rights law for generations. "I'll survive. "But these officers in this airport won't survive what's coming next," Marcus replied, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of steel that Martinez had never heard before. His second call reached David Chen, his longtime business partner and one of the most successful corporate attorneys on the East Coast. "David, cancel everything. We're going to war." Within 6 hours, Marcus had assembled what the media would later call the legal dream team of the century. 6 attorneys specializing in civil rights, federal discrimination law, and corporate litigation descended on Atlanta like a perfectly coordinated invasion force. The third call went to Rebecca Williams, Thompson Industries Director of Media Relations, a former CNN anchor who had left journalism to work for Marcus because she believed in his vision for corporate social responsibility. "Rebecca, it's time to tell our story. Every major network, every newspaper, every platform that matters." As news of the shooting spread across social media, something unprecedented began happening. Thompson Industries' stock price, instead of falling due to the negative publicity, began to surge. Investors recognized that Marcus's response to this injustice would likely increase his influence and his company's profile exponentially. Celebrity supporters began speaking out within hours. Oprah Winfrey called the shooting a wake-up call for America. LeBron James posted a statement calling Marcus a hero who shouldn't have had to bleed to prove his worth. Tech industry leaders like Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai issued statements supporting Marcus and condemning the officer's actions. But Marcus surprised everyone by refusing the airport's immediate settlement offers. When attorneys representing Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport arrived with authorization to write a check for $50 million in exchange for his silence, Marcus politely declined. "This isn't about money," he told the stunned settlement negotiators. "This is about systematic change. You can't buy your way out of institutional racism." The FBI's Civil Rights Division launched their investigation within 24 hours, a response time that reflected both the severity of the incident and Marcus's prominence in American business and philanthropy. Agent Sarah Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of civil rights enforcement, had investigated hundreds of discrimination cases, but none involving someone with Marcus's resources and connections. Security camera footage from 17 different angles was subpoenaed, revealing a pattern of racial profiling that extended far beyond Marcus's case. Data analysis showed that black passengers were subjected to additional screening at 3 times the rate of white passengers, despite having identical security profiles. The anonymous tip that had supposedly triggered the entire incident was quickly exposed as fabricated. Digital forensics revealed that Officer Johnson had called in the false report himself, using his personal cell phone to create justification for the discriminatory treatment that had already begun. Marcus's legal team uncovered text messages between the officers that revealed overtly racist attitudes and a planned harassment campaign. Johnson had written, "Time to teach another uppity one a lesson." Blake had responded, "About time someone put these people in their place." What shocked everyone who thought they knew Marcus Thompson was his strategic patience. While other victims of police violence sought immediate headlines and emotional appeals, Marcus methodically built an unassailable case that would not only seek justice for himself, but fundamentally change how airports across America treated minority passengers. Do you think Marcus's calm, strategic approach is more effective than immediate emotional responses to injustice? Comment number 1, if you believe his methodical planning will create lasting change, or number 2, if you think he should have spoken out more forcefully right away. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't believe what Marcus does next. His response is about to get even more shocking. The charitable donations began pouring in as news of Marcus's shooting spread worldwide. The Marcus Thompson Foundation, which had already provided scholarships to thousands of students, received over $2 million in donations within the first week. Contributors ranged from ordinary citizens donating $5 to tech billionaires writing 7-figure checks. International attention followed quickly. The BBC, Al Jazeera, and major European news networks picked up the story, framing it as another example of American racial inequality. The negative publicity cost Atlanta's tourism industry an estimated $20 million in the first month alone as international travelers began avoiding the city. Airport security unions attempted to defend their officers, but the evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage had been deliberately disabled, Witness statements had been falsified, and the officer's own communications revealed premeditated discrimination rather than legitimate security concerns. Marcus gave his first major press conference from his hospital bed, addressing a room packed with national and international journalists. His calm demeanor and articulate responses contrasted sharply with the violent treatment he had received, creating a powerful visual narrative that resonated with audiences worldwide. "I don't want revenge," Marcus stated clearly, his words carrying more impact because of their unexpected restraint. "I want reform, I want accountability, and I want to ensure that no other successful professional, regardless of their race, has to experience what I experienced in that screening room." His announcement that any settlement money would be donated to civil rights organizations rather than kept for personal use sent shockwaves through legal circles. Attorneys estimated that Marcus could potentially receive hundreds of millions in damages, money he was pledging to give away in pursuit of systematic change. The story went viral internationally, but what happened next would prove that Marcus Thompson was playing a completely different game than anyone realized. His master plan was about to unfold in ways that would transform this moment of injustice into something extraordinary. The FBI's civil rights investigation, led by Agent Sarah Rodriguez, quickly evolved from a routine discrimination case into one of the most comprehensive examinations of institutional racism in American transportation history. What they discovered, in the depths of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport security protocols, would shock investigators and civil rights advocates alike. Digital forensics experts analyzing the airport's computer systems uncovered a disturbing pattern of discriminatory practices that had been hidden from public view for years. The random additional screening that Marcus had experienced was anything but random. Sophisticated data analysis revealed that passengers with typically black names were flagged for extra security measures at a rate nearly 4 times higher than those with typically white names. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sociologist from Harvard University who served as an expert witness, testified that the airport's practices constituted systematic institutional racism disguised as security protocol. Her analysis of 5 years of screening data showed statistical disparities so extreme that they could not be explained by chance or legitimate security concerns. The text message conversations between officers Johnson, Blake, and Rodriguez revealed a culture of racism that permeated the security department. Johnson had written, "These people think they can just waltz through here like they own the place." Blake had responded, "Not on our watch." The messages, recovered from their personal devices, painted a picture of premeditated discrimination rather than split-second judgment errors. Marcus's legal team, led by Jennifer Martinez, methodically built a case that extended far beyond the shooting itself. They uncovered internal airport documents showing that complaints about discriminatory treatment had been systematically ignored or covered up by management. Over 200 formal complaints filed by minority passengers in the previous 3 years had resulted in exactly 0 disciplinary actions against security personnel. Airport training materials obtained through discovery requests revealed bias-laden protocols that instructed officers to pay special attention to passengers who displayed urban characteristics or non-traditional business attire. The materials, written by contracted security consultants, essentially codified racial profiling as official policy. Marcus, recovering in his hospital suite, reviewed each piece of evidence with the analytical mind that had built his billion-dollar empire. "This isn't just about me," he told his legal team during one of their daily strategy sessions. "This is about systematic oppression hiding behind the facade of security." Whistleblower testimony came from an unexpected source. Officer Maria Santos, a 10-year airport security veteran who had witnessed the discriminatory practices but feared retaliation for speaking out. Santos revealed that supervisors had informal quotas for additional screenings that disproportionately targeted minority passengers. "We were told to trust our instincts," Santos testified in her deposition. "But those instincts had been shaped by training that taught us to see certain types of people as inherently suspicious." The investigation expanded to include hiring practices within the airport security department. Federal investigators discovered that diversity training had been eliminated 3 years earlier as a cost-cutting measure. despite the airport receiving federal funds that required such programs. Medical records confirmed that Marcus had never posed a physical threat to anyone. At 5 feet 10 inches and 170 pounds, with no history of violence or aggressive behavior, he hardly fit the profile of a dangerous individual requiring lethal force. The officers had shot an unarmed businessman whose only weapon was his success and confidence. Ballistics experts testified that all 3 shots had been fired from close range at a man who was clearly attempting to comply with contradictory commands. The trajectory analysis showed that Marcus had been backing away from the officers when they opened fire, contradicting their claims of aggressive behavior. Internal airport communications revealed an immediate cover-up attempt. Within minutes of the shooting, Supervisor Hayes had sent emails instructing officers to coordinate their statements and ensure their recollections were consistent. The emails recovered from the airport's servers demonstrated consciousness of guilt and awareness that their actions could not be justified. Character witnesses for Marcus included senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, and Nobel Prize winners, who had worked with him on various charitable initiatives. Their testimony painted a picture of a gentle, thoughtful man whose philanthropic work had touched thousands of lives. The anonymous tip that had supposedly triggered the incident was thoroughly debunked through digital forensics. Phone records showed that Johnson had called in the false report himself, creating a paper trail to justify discriminatory treatment that had already begun based purely on Marcus's race. Expert testimony from Dr. James Baldwin, a former FBI profiler, concluded that the officer's actions showed clear evidence of racial bias rather than legitimate threat assessment. Professional security personnel are trained to de-escalate situations, Baldwin testified. These officers escalated at every opportunity, suggesting their judgment was compromised by preconceived notions. The investigation revealed that body camera malfunctions were suspiciously common when minority passengers were involved in security incidents. Technical analysis showed that the cameras had been deliberately disabled, not experiencing random technical failures as initially claimed. Marcus's business background was thoroughly investigated by federal auditors, who found his company's finances to be completely legitimate and transparent. Thompson Industries had been audited multiple times by federal agencies and had consistently received the highest ratings for corporate governance and financial responsibility. The merger documents that officers had claimed looked suspicious were reviewed by securities experts who confirmed they were standard corporate acquisition papers that had been prepared by some of the most prestigious law firms in America and approved by federal regulators. Public records requests revealed a pattern of discrimination complaints that had been buried by airport management. Over the previous 5 years, minority passengers had filed formal complaints at twice the rate of white passengers, yet disciplinary actions against security personnel remained virtually non-existent. Training records showed that officers Johnson, Blake, and Rodriguez had never received proper instruction in de-escalation techniques or cultural sensitivity, despite federal requirements for such training. The airport had certified their completion of programs that had never actually been conducted. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities in the security department's budget. Funds allocated for diversity training and bias prevention programs had been diverted to other purposes, including bonuses for supervisory staff who had overseen the discriminatory practices. Marcus's medical team provided testimony about the severity of his injuries and the long-term impact of the shooting. Despite his calm public demeanor, he would require months of physical therapy and would carry permanent scars from the 3 bullet wounds. 6 months after 3 bullets tore through his body in a Terminal C security room, Marcus Thompson stood before a packed federal courthouse as justice finally arrived for the officers who had nearly killed him. The scene outside the courthouse resembled a civil rights rally, with hundreds of supporters carrying signs reading, "Justice for Marcus" and "End Airport Racism." Federal prosecutors had filed civil rights violation charges against all 4 officers involved in the incident. The evidence was so overwhelming that Johnson, Blake, and Rodriguez had little choice but to accept plea agreements that would send them to federal prison for terms ranging from 8 to 12 years. Supervisor Hayes faced the most serious charges, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and filing false reports. His trial had lasted 3 weeks, with Marcus's calm, dignified testimony serving as the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. "I bear no personal hatred toward these men," Marcus had told the jury, his voice steady despite the difficulty of reliving his ordeal. "But their actions represent a systematic problem that requires systematic solutions. Accountability isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring this never happens to anyone else." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty. Verdicts on all counts. Hayes was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a term that sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide and served notice that discriminatory violence would no longer be tolerated. But Marcus's pursuit of justice extended far beyond individual prosecutions. His legal team had simultaneously pursued a class-action lawsuit on behalf of every minority passenger who had experienced discriminatory treatment at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport over the previous 10 years. The settlement negotiations revealed the true scope of the problem. Airport records showed that over 3,000 passengers had filed formal discrimination complaints, representing just a fraction of those who had experienced biased treatment but never reported it. The final settlement amount reached $250 million, the largest airport discrimination settlement in American history. Marcus shocked everyone by announcing that he would donate his entire personal settlement, estimated at over $100 million, to establish the Airport Justice Foundation. The foundation would provide legal representation for discrimination victims, fund bias training programs, and monitor airport security practices nationwide. The institutional changes demanded by Marcus's legal team transformed airport security protocols across America. The Department of Homeland Security mandated comprehensive bias training for all TSA personnel, implemented independent oversight committees at major airports, and established new procedures for investigating discrimination. Complaints. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport underwent a complete restructuring of its security operations. The entire leadership team was replaced, new hiring practices prioritized diversity and cultural competency, and an independent monitor was installed to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination policies. The Marcus Thompson Terminal, as Terminal C was renamed in his honor, became a model for non-discriminatory security practices. Advanced screening technology reduced the need for subjective human judgment, while comprehensive training programs helped security personnel recognize and overcome unconscious bias. Marcus's testimony before Congress led to the passage of the Airport Civil Rights Act, federal legislation that strengthened protections for minority travelers and established harsh penalties for discriminatory practices. The bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, a rare moment of unity in an increasingly polarized political environment. The 3 officers who had shot Marcus faced not only federal prison time but also civil lawsuits that would bankrupt them for the rest of their lives. Johnson lost his home, his pension, and his family as the consequences of his actions rippled through every aspect of his existence. Blake, the youngest of the officers, had cooperated fully with investigators and expressed genuine remorse for his actions. Marcus, in an act of forgiveness that stunned legal observers, included provisions in the settlement that would provide counseling and job training for Blake upon his release from prison. Rodriguez, who had fired the shot that nearly killed Marcus, showed no remorse and blamed political correctness for his prosecution. He received the harshest sentence and would spend the next 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. The ripple effects of Marcus's case extended throughout the aviation industry. Airlines began implementing their own anti-discrimination training programs, airport authorities across the country revised their security protocols, and civil rights organizations received increased funding and support. Marcus's company, Thompson Industries, had grown by 30% during the year following the shooting, as consumers and investors demonstrated their support through increased business and stock purchases. The company's commitment to social justice had transformed from a moral imperative into a competitive advantage. The scholarship fund established with Marcus's settlement money provided full college tuition for over 500 students in its first year. Recipients were chosen not based on race, but on economic need and academic potential, reflecting Marcus's belief that opportunity should be based on merit rather than demographics. International attention had made Marcus a global symbol of dignity. in the face of injustice. He received honorary degrees from 12 universities, spoke at the United Nations about institutional racism, and was invited to address parliaments and governments around the world. But the most profound change was in Marcus himself. The shooting had stripped away any illusions about American equality, while simultaneously revealing the true extent of his power to create change. He had learned that success could not protect him from discrimination, but it could enable him to fight discrimination in ways that few people ever could. The Marcus Thompson Foundation expanded its mission beyond airport discrimination to address systematic bias in healthcare, education, housing, and employment. With an annual budget of over $50 million, the foundation became one of the most influential civil rights organizations in America. 1 year after security officers had shot him 3 times in Terminal C, Marcus Thompson stood before a massive crowd gathered at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport for what the media had billed as the most important press conference of his life. Behind him, construction crews were putting the finishing touches on renovations that had transformed the terminal beyond recognition. The announcement that shocked the world came with characteristic calm from the man who had turned personal tragedy into systematic change. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to announce that Thompson Industries has completed the acquisition of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The gasps from the assembled crowd were audible even over the construction noise. Marcus had purchased the entire airport complex through a series of strategic business moves that had been planned long before the shooting, but accelerated by the injustice he had suffered. The $800 million merger meeting that I missed due to being shot by security officers, Marcus continued, his voice carrying both irony and determination, was actually the final step in acquiring the investment consortium that controlled this airport's private management contracts. The revelation sent shockwaves through the business world. Marcus had been planning to transform airport security practices through ownership rather than litigation, but the shooting had given him additional motivation and public support that made his vision unstoppable. The transformation of the airport under Marcus's leadership became a model studied by aviation authorities worldwide. Advanced artificial intelligence screening systems eliminated human bias from security decisions, while comprehensive training programs helped remaining human personnel recognize and overcome unconscious prejudices. But the most shocking element of Marcus's transformation was his treatment of the officers who had shot him. Rodriguez, who had shown no remorse, would serve his full sentence and receive no assistance from Marcus's foundation. Johnson, whose racist attitudes had triggered the entire incident, would similarly face the full consequences of his actions. Blake, however, received an offer that stunned the legal community. Upon his release from federal prison, Marcus offered him a position as a security consultant with the Marcus Thompson Foundation, helping design training programs to prevent other officers from making the same mistakes. Redemption is possible for those who genuinely seek it, Marcus explained to reporters who questioned his decision. Blake was young, influenced by senior officers, and has shown genuine remorse. If we truly believe in rehabilitation, we must be willing to demonstrate it. The former Terminal C, where Marcus had nearly died, was renamed the Civil Rights Memorial Terminal. The security screening room where he had been shot was converted into a museum exhibit, documenting the history of transportation discrimination and the ongoing fight for equal treatment. Dr. Angela Foster, the medical officer who had first treated Marcus's gunshot wounds, became his wife in a ceremony that symbolized hope emerging from tragedy. Their wedding reception, held in the main concourse of the terminal where he had been shot, attracted guests from around the world and raised over $10 million for civil rights organizations. The airport's financial performance under Marcus's leadership exceeded all projections. The combination of his business acumen, the positive publicity from his transformation story, and the airport's reputation as a model of equality attracted increased traffic and investment that generated hundreds of millions in additional revenue. The Marcus Thompson Justice Award, presented annually at the airport, recognized individuals and organizations making significant contributions to civil rights and social justice. Recipients included everyone from community organizers to corporate executives who had used their positions to advance equality. Marcus's story became required reading in business schools, police academies, and civil rights programs across America. The case study of how he had transformed personal victimization into systematic change influenced a generation of leaders who learned that the most powerful response to injustice was often measured action rather than emotional reaction. International visitors began traveling to Atlanta specifically to see the airport that had become a symbol of redemption and transformation. The Marcus Thompson experience included tours of the Civil Rights Memorial Terminal, the museum exhibit in the former screening room, and presentations about the ongoing work of bias elimination in transportation security. The scholarship programs funded by Marcus's settlement money had grown to support over 2,000 students annually. Recipients were encouraged to pursue careers in law, public service, and social justice, creating a pipeline of future leaders committed to equality and fairness. Thompson Industries expanded its social responsibility initiatives to address discrimination in healthcare, education, housing, and employment. The company's commitment to justice had become as much a part of its brand identity as its technological innovations, attracting both customers and employees who shared Marcus's values. 5 years after the shooting, the airport's security screening process had been completely revolutionized. Artificial intelligence systems evaluated actual threat indicators rather than superficial characteristics, while human officers focused on customer service and assistance rather than enforcement and intimidation. The transformation extended beyond the airport itself. Marcus's example had inspired similar changes at transportation hubs across America and around the world. His model of using business success to drive social change had been replicated by other successful entrepreneurs who recognized their responsibility to address systematic inequalities. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in Marcus himself. The successful businessman who had once focused primarily on profits and growth had become one of America's most influential civil rights leaders, using his resources and platform to address injustices that extended far beyond his personal experience. Standing in the terminal where he had once bled on the floor from 3 gunshot wounds, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The discrimination he had faced had been devastating, but his response had created changes that would benefit generations of travelers who would never know his name. The Marcus Thompson International Airport, as it was now officially known, served over 100 million passengers annually, each one protected by security protocols designed to ensure dignity and equality, regardless of race, religion, or background. The terminal where he had nearly died had become a beacon of hope and transformation. Marcus Thompson's extraordinary journey teaches us that the most powerful response to injustice isn't always immediate retaliation, but strategic transformation that creates lasting change. His story demonstrates that success doesn't shield anyone from discrimination, but it can provide the resources and platform necessary to fight systematic oppression effectively. The key lesson lies in Marcus's approach. He channeled his pain into purpose, his trauma into transformation. Rather than seeking personal revenge, he focused on institutional reform that would protect future generations from experiencing similar injustices. His decision to purchase the very airport where he was shot shows that sometimes the best way to defeat a broken system is to replace it entirely. Marcus's willingness to forgive and offer redemption to Officer Blake, while still demanding accountability from unrepentant perpetrators, illustrates the delicate balance between justice and mercy. His story proves that individual actions can indeed create systematic change when combined with strategic thinking, adequate resources, and unwavering determination. Most importantly, Marcus's transformation from victim to champion demonstrates that our worst moments can become catalysts for our greatest contributions to humanity. His legacy reminds us that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can always control how we respond. How do you think successful individuals should use their influence to combat discrimination? What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us whether you believe his strategic approach was more effective than immediate public outcry. If this incredible story of turning injustice into positive change inspired you, please hit that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear this message of hope and transformation. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories of resilience, justice, and the power of strategic thinking in the face of adversity. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family, especially anyone who might be facing their own challenges with discrimination or injustice. Sometimes knowing that transformation is possible can make all the difference in someone's darkest hour. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey from tragedy to triumph. Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that even when the world seems stacked against us, we have the power to create positive change that extends far beyond our own lives. Keep believing in justice, keep fighting for equality, and remember that your response to adversity can inspire generations to come.